The city slept, or rather, it pretended to. Beneath a sky choked by smog, the city held its breath. A chill wind howled, a lonely siren wailed in the distance. Midnight had swallowed the light, leaving only an uneasy silence. This was Detective Harding's domain now. The darkness whispered to him, secrets carried on the wind. Harding, a man sculpted by years of dealing with the city's underbelly, ran a hand through his weary face. His eyes, though, were sharp, alert, scanning the desolate streets. He could almost taste the fear that clung to the air, thick and cloying. It was in the abrupt silence of a late-night news broadcast. It was in the way mothers clutched their children a little closer, even in the supposed safety of their homes. He was hunting a ghost, a phantom they called the Midnight Murderer. 3 victims, each with a cryptic message carved into their skin. Each death more gruesome, more theatrical than the last. The city held its breath, waiting, wondering who would be next. Harding was determined to make sure there wasn't a next time. Detective Harding was a bloodhound, relentless and consumed by his work. Sleep was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with the Midnight Murderer still at large. The case had gotten under his skin, burrowed deep. He saw the victims' faces in every shadow, heard their silent screams in the dead of night. The weight of the city's fear pressed down on him, threatening to break him. He sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, the case files spread out on his table like a macabre jigsaw puzzle. Photos, reports, witness statements, all pieces of a puzzle he couldn't seem to solve. The victims were seemingly random: a young street musician, a wealthy socialite, a retired librarian. The only thing connecting them was the killer's calling card, those cryptic messages etched into their skin. Harding picked up a photo of the latest victim, the librarian. Her name was Eleanor, and she had a kind face, the kind a child would trust. The message carved on her palm was a single word: silence. What did it mean? Was the killer trying to silence someone, or were they sending a message about something else entirely? The latest crime scene was a symphony in blue and red. Flashing lights painted the rain-slicked streets in an eerie glow. The air crackled with tension as officers moved with practiced efficiency. Harding stepped past the cordon tape, his eyes drawn to the body lying under a white sheet. He knew what he would find underneath. He always did. He pulled back the sheet. The victim, a young man with a shock of red hair, stared up at the unforgiving night sky. His eyes were wide open, frozen in a silent scream. On his forehead, carved with surgical precision, was a single symbol, a circle with a dot in the center. Harding recognized it instantly: the solar symbol. The killer was playing a game, toying with him. Each message was a piece of a puzzle, leading him on a twisted scavenger hunt through the city's darkest corners. But what was the final picture he was trying to create, and how many more lives would be lost before he found out? Days bled into nights. Harding became a recluse in his own world, the walls plastered with photos, maps, and cryptic symbols. He was obsessed, driven by a burning need to understand the killer's twisted logic. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by endless cups of coffee and the nagging feeling that he was missing something, some vital clue that held the key to the entire puzzle. He had called in favors, consulted with experts in ancient languages and symbology. The circle with a dot, they told him, was a complex symbol, representing concepts like wholeness, unity, and the cycle of life and death. But how did it fit into the killer's grand scheme? What was he trying to achieve? Harding stared at the board, his eyes bloodshot, his mind racing. He felt like he was on the verge of a breakthrough, but something held him back. He was missing something, he could feel it in his gut. But what? The answer, he knew, lay hidden in the darkness, waiting for him to find it. The investigation was a labyrinth of dead ends and false leads. Every time Harding thought he was close, the killer slipped through his fingers, leaving behind another cryptic message and another victim. The pressure was mounting. The media was having a field day, the public was demanding answers, and Harding was running out of time. He had a suspect, a professor of ancient history who had been fired from the university for his radical views. The man was an expert in ancient symbols and he fit the profile perfectly. But when they brought him in for questioning, he had an alibi for every murder. The professor was released, and Harding was back to square one. The city was on edge. Fear hung in the air like a thick fog. People were afraid to go out at night, afraid to become the next victim. Harding felt the weight of their fear on his shoulders. He had to catch this killer, not just for the victims, but for the city itself. The breakthrough came when Harding least expected it. He was going through the victims' files again, this time focusing on their personal belongings, when he noticed something strange. Each victim had received a postcard in the weeks leading up to their death. Postcards that seemed innocuous at first glance, depicting scenic views and tourist traps. But as Harding looked closer, he noticed something chilling. Each postcard had a single word circled in red ink, words that, when strung together, formed a message. The light will consume us all. And then it hit him, the solar symbol, the messages about silence, the seemingly random victims. It wasn't random at all. It was all connected. He knew who the killer was. The realization struck him like a bolt of lightning, and suddenly everything became clear. The killer wasn't trying to silence anyone. They were sending a warning about an impending disaster, something that would consume us all. But who would do such a thing, and why? The final confrontation took place on a night when the moon hung heavy in the sky, a crimson orb that cast the city in an eerie red glow. The air crackled with anticipation as Harding stood face to face with the killer. It wasn't the disgruntled professor nor a disgruntled relative of one of the victims. It was a person who had been helping him all along, blending into the background. It was the quiet, unassuming assistant medical examiner, Dr. Emily Carter, the one who had seen the bodies, examined the messages, the one who had access to all the files, all the evidence. Her eyes, usually filled with warmth and compassion, were now cold, calculating. "You were right, detective," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "The light will consume us all. And these deaths? They were mercy killings, a way to spare them from the inevitable." Harding looked at her, a mixture of anger and sadness washing over him. He had been so close to the truth, yet so blind. She was right about one thing, though. The light would consume them all. But it wouldn't be the way she thought. As sirens wailed in the distance and the blood moon cast long, distorted shadows across the city, Harding made a choice. He would bring her in, let the law deal with her. The city might be consumed by darkness, but he would be its light, however flickering and uncertain it might be.